So in this video, we're just going to be taking a look at how we can use Google's OAuth2 server, its endpoint, to create a Chrome extension that relies on that endpoint. So someone logging into our Chrome extension in order to use our Chrome extension would have the option of using their Google account to log in rather than our own login system. So if that interests you at all, stick around. Let's begin. All right, so before we even begin coding, we need to set up our Chrome extension so it has access to to Google's OAuth2 endpoint. So that's a bit of a process, and it depends on whether or not you're developing or you're in production of your Chrome extension. We're just developing. Normally, you would upload this extension to the Chrome store, and we're looking for a unique key in the manifest file. But since we don't want to upload this to the Chrome store in order to be validated and it be public, we're just developing. We need to go a different way. So what we're just going to do is we're going to fill out the name, all this stuff first. So I'm just going to say OAuth2 OpenID Connect. Let's say test OpenID. That looks good. The background, we're going to add a script here we're going to use later on in the video. You'll see it's the JSRSASIGN-all.min.js. And we need the identity permission, which gives us access to the identity API, which we're going to use to ping the OAuth2 endpoint. So we're going to save this. We're going to go to our browser. We're going to go to the extensions tab, Chrome://extensions. We are going to pack an extension, navigate to the folder, select that folder, pack the extension, should generate 2 files. We're concerned with the CRX file. So go to wherever that's installed, or excuse me, wherever it's at. Mine would be the desktop. We're going to drag and drop that CRX file into the Chrome browser, add the extension, pay attention to this ID. We need to find a folder with this ID. So we're going to go to, and if you're doing a Safari or Mac operating system or Linux, it's going to be different. But for Windows, we're going to go into the user, the appropriate user, go to app data, local, Google, Chrome, user data, default extensions, and we're looking for a folder with the same ID. So the ID is NNEDHOG. NNEDHOG right here. You go to that folder, we're looking at the manifest, and the manifest is going to have a key that we need. So open this up, copy this line right here, this key line, so 2 lines, and we're going to paste it in the Chrome extension we're actually developing. So copy this, we can close this, we'll go back to our manifest file and we'll add the key here, comma at the end. All right, so that's one portion of how we set this guy up. Next, we need to go into the console.developers.google.com. We're going to create a project. Of course, you have to sign in if you're not signed in. I'm going to call this one, I don't know, test. I say Chrome extension test OpenID. I'm going to create. Now we're going to fill out 2 things. First, the OAuth consent screen, and then the credentials. So the OAuth consent screen is what the user sees when they click to log in with something other than whatever your app's login system is, so they can offload it onto a Google or a Facebook or a Twitter. It's the screen that they see that says, hey, Google or Twitter or whatever wants access to your calendar, your contacts, or whatever. So external, create, application name, we're just going to say Chrome extension OpenID test. We don't need to fill out any of these things. We're just going to save. Now let's go into the credentials. We need an OpenID, or excuse me, an OAuth2 client ID. So we're going to create a credential up here, OAuth client ID, application type. We need a web app. Even though we're doing a Chrome extension, we need a web app's application type. The name, Chrome extension, what did I say, OpenID test, OpenID test, authorized redirect URIs. So we need this here. The URI we're going to authorize is https:// the client ID of your, not the client ID, the Chrome extension ID, this guy right here, paste.chromium, I think it's chromiumapp.org. going to create that. And there we go. We got the client ID and we have the secret. So before we start doing this, just because we loaded up the CRX in the Chrome browser, we still don't have access to the extension. We need to remove this. We need to load unpacked. We're going to load the development Chrome extension. So go to wherever the Chrome extension is installed. Mine's on my desktop, select that folder, and there we go. We have access to the extension we're developing right here. So now we're ready to actually start coding this guy. So before we even begin programming, let me show you what we're working with here. We have the manifest file that you saw earlier on. We have a background.js just as a listener, and we're going to be using the pop-up page to test this this OpenID Connect business. We're not going to be injecting a foreground script. So all the pop-up pages do, there's two of them. One is for when we're signed in, and one is for when we're signed out. So when we're signed out, we need to sign in. We're going to have this guy showing here. So we click on this, and it's, excuse me, not that guy. This one right here. So we need to sign in. Once you sign in, we'll close down this pop-up here. When they click on this extension icon, they'll be greeted with this this page right here for them to sign up. So those are the two the two pop-up pages. And of course, these are their accompanying scripts. When they click the sign in button, we'll message the backend to log them in. And that button here is just for diagnostic purposes. When you click the user status, it's just going to alert us to whether or not the user is signed in. If they're signed in, it's true. If they're not signed in, it's false. And of course, the pop-up signed in script is the exact same, except it's messaging the backend to log out, the exact same button for the user status right there. All right, so with that said, let's actually start coding this guy. All right, so let's do this. Start with a variable. So user signed in. Let's say to false for now. Let's put a tree here. So we know we're getting three different messages. So request.message is equal to, the first one's login. This should be else if request.message is equal to logout. There we go. Copy paste that line. And then finally the last message was, what was the last message? Is user signed in? Is user signed in? And so when they hit the login request message on the back end, we have two things to do. So if they're signed in, let me create a function that gives us this the state of their sign-in status. So is user signed in? We're just going to return the user signed in. So if they're already signed in, so is user signed in, we don't really care about anything. We're just going to do console.log user is already signed in. User is already signed in. Else we sign them in here. All right, so let's start constructing that the OAuth2 endpoint URL. Give me some space. I think there's 6 parameters plus 1, so 6 constants and then one variable. So const, the first is going to be client ID. Did I spell that right? No, I didn't. Client ID. It's going to be an encode of a URI component. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's do the response type. Response type. We'll do the redirect URI. We'll do the state. We'll do the scope. And then we'll do the, what is the last one? Prompt. Yeah. All right. Client ID we get from the what is this? The console developer google.com. This guy right here. Just copy this. Copy this. Place it in here. That's the client ID. Response type, we want an ID token. Redirect URL, URI, it's also in here. So just go to the edit properties, and it should be right here. Copy this. Paste this here. The state, we'll just do that. And I'm assuming you know how OAuth2 works. I'm not going to explain these states, scope, and all that. Scope, we want the OpenID, and the prompt should be a T here. Prompt, we want consent. There we go. Let's create a function that constructs a OAuth2 endpoint. So function get create OAuth2 URL, whatever. And I'm going to copy this line right here, copy and paste, just a random string of numbers for the nonce value. Let's construct the URI. So let URL, whatever. There we go. And it's going to be HTTP, let's do it here, https://accounts.google.com/o/auth2v2/auth. Do that for the ending. I don't think we need that. We'll see if we don't need that. And so let's start the query string. So the client ID we're going to pass in is just the client ID. The next guy, ampersand, response type. So response type is going to be response type. Next guy is the redirect URI. Redirect URI is equal to the redirect URI. And then finally, the state is equal to that state. We have the scope. It's equal to the scope. And then we have, what do we have? Prompt is equal to that prompt. And finally, we have the nonce value. It's equal to the nonce. Let me print this out so we see that we're doing it properly. Console.log URL and return URL. All right. When we log in, user signed in is false to start. Perfect. Let's call this function and see if we're constructing the URL properly. So create OAuth2, call that. Let's go back to our page here. Extension, refresh. I need the background page. Console, perfect. Let's get the sign in button. And that's the URL for the OAuth2 endpoint. We might need to put the slashes at the end to construct one large string, but we'll see. So let's get to signing the user in. So if they're signed in, we don't care. If they're not signed in, we care. So chrome.identity, that API.launch, what is it? Launch web auth flow, 2 arguments. The first argument, second argument's a function with the redirect URI. I'll put URL here, which we'll get to in a second. The first argument's the URL. It's a set of options. So we need to create the URL, and then we're going to do a interactive, set that to true, so they can actually pick which account they want to sign in with. And so when we successfully ping or fetch or access that endpoint, we're going to get a redirect URL back. Let me show you guys what that looks like. Let's see if this works. So back here, what's the error here? Message port closed before, yes, okay. So when you ping the back end like this, it's expecting a response. So for now, we'll say return true. And if they successfully sign in, we'll just do return a success. There we go. Clear that, go back here, refresh, no errors, perfect. All right, so we're expecting the, do I still have it in there? Let me take away this, I don't need this. All right, so we're expecting a response from the Google OAuth2 endpoint. Background page, click the sign in, and I should get a pop-up. There we go. So we sign in object is a, what is it? It's at proton.com. Enter my password. And there we go. So this is the redirect URI they sent back. And there is a token in here. There's a ... So it's a lot longer. Let me show you guys. Let me do control copy this. Go back in here. Let me just paste it here so I can show you guys. All right. So what we're concerned with, we're going to do some parsing of this URL. So we don't need any of this stuff here. We're concerned with the ID token parameter that got passed back. So ID token is equal to all this whole thing. This is all the information from my account, basic information from my account from the Google source. And we don't want anything here after the and. So I'm going to copy and paste 3 lines that take this ID token, this whole string, out of that URI. So let me just delete this, and let me just paste it right here. So all these 3 lines are 2 lines first, and then I'll explain the 3rd line. So the 2 lines, all they do is take out that string from the ID token parameter. They take it out and put it into the ID token here. And then we use that library I referenced earlier, that JSRS. And I'll have a link in the description below on where to get this library. It helps you tease apart a JWT or open the JWT. So let me print this out so you guys can see what we're getting. Console.log, user info. And we don't need the redirect URI anymore. And I'll explain to you why I'm even doing this. It's unnecessary, but I'll explain to you why. So let's go back, refresh, background page. And let's go here, sign in. I should be signed in already. I should get an option to just click. There we go. Click that. There we go. So this is the JWT, the ID token opened up. We have AUD, AZP, expiry dates, an issuer, the nonce that we passed in, and a sub. The sub would be the thing you're using to identify basically my account on Google. I could change my ID or my email associated with this Google account, but I can't change this. This is going to always be associated with my my Google accounts. If you want to store something that's unique to the user signing in your app on your own backend, on your own server, you'd use this. You wouldn't use their email. So let me explain to you why we're even doing this stuff here. So per the Google Docs, you really don't need to tease apart and check the ID token because it's coming straight from the Google server, so it's trusted. But just as a matter of habit, you want to check that the ID token that you got back is a valid ID token. And so there's things called signatures. We won't be doing that in this video. So a basic check of what we're going to do is we're going to check 2 things. We're going to check that the issuer is either accounts.google.com, or I think the other one was accounts.google.com. There's no HTTPS. So we're just going to check that the issuer is one of the 2 domains of Google. And we're going to check that the AUD, this AUD is the exact same thing as this guy right here. The client ID, the 69, whatever. So we're just going to say if user info, and what was it called? It was called the AUD. So user info AUD is equal to, and it should be the exact same AUD as the client ID. It's equal to the client ID. And let's set up something here. I want to set up this. So we want the user info dot issuer. Yes. Issuer is equal to 2 things. So https:// accounts.google.com, or the user info dot issuer is equal to simply accounts.google.com. And then we need an and here. So if the issuer is one of these 2 URLs, why do I have this? That should be a or. It's one of these 2 URLs, and the client ID matches this client ID. We know we've successfully gotten a valid token from the server. So we can say send response success. Let me delete this. So 3 things. Send back a response of success. We're going to set the user status, user signed in, to true, and we're going to change the this pop-up page. So now that they're signed in, we want this to be the pop-up signed in script. So we're going to do that with a chrome.browser action. So chrome.browser action.set pop-up. And the file is going to be called, what's the file called? popup-signed-in.html. There we go. And there's a function. We don't really care about the response. We'll put these 2 guys in the response there. And that should be an end there. All right, let's do a semicolon here. And if it's not one of these 2 accounts and the client doesn't match, we're just going to say else, console.log could not authenticate. Let me just go to the front end, or the sign. What's doing this? Set pop-up. This should be the pop-up right here. There we go. Could not authenticate. So like I was saying, let me just go to the front end quickly. So we're going to send a response back to the signed, who called this? The signed in script right here. The pop-up script, not the signed in. So once we get that response, we'll say if response is equal to success. We're going to do a window dot close. We're just going to force the user to open the window again. And there we go. The window dot close, which forces this window closed right here, and then they're forced to press it, and then they'll see the new page. You'll see. All right, so let's try the extension now. Go back here, refresh the extension, background page. Let's click sign in. Choose the account. And we'll allow. And this little, our pop-up closed. We click the pop-up again, and we're greeted with the sign out page. Currently nothing happens when we click sign out. We actually get an error. What's the error? Message port closed. Let's fix that. All right, so when we sign out, we're not going to do anything with the identity API. We're just going to simply do something like this. We'll just do user signed in, set that to false. We'll do something like this, return a true for now. And we're going to have to do, let me copy this. We're going to set the page back to the original pop-up page. And set pop-up should be just popup.html. And take signed in false, and it's successful. Here we go, send success. And when we go here, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're just going to close the pop-up window. Save that. Save that. Let's go back here. Let me sign out of the browser so we can see this. Actually, let me do this. Let me see if the user status button works. No, it doesn't. Why not? Message port closed before a response was received. User signed in. We're not returning anything. Return is user signed in. There we go. Let's see if that works before I sign out of the browser. Refresh, go here. Actually, I need the background page. User status, still an error. Message port closed before. Return. Oh, I see. Wrong way. Send response. There we go. Refresh background page. That should fix it. User status. And I have nothing there saying what to do with the actual status. Let me just do this. Alert, response. Same thing with this guy here. Alert with that response and close these guys. All right, refresh, background page. Click the user status, should be false because we're not signed in. There we go. All right, let me sign to the browser and then we'll see what happens. So sign out of the browser. All right, close this. Refresh the extension. Background page is up. Let's sign into our Chrome extension. We'll choose an account. We'll click allow. And there we go. Let's sign out. Close the pop-up page. I click in. We should have the sign-in page. And the sign-in page. User status should be false. Perfect. So that's the basic gist of how we use Google's OAuth2 Endpoint and its API, that Chrome Identity API, in order to create a Chrome extension that allows the user to log into your Chrome extension, but with a third party, specifically a Google account. Now, this would absolutely work with other OAuth2 servers, so you can log in with something like Facebook or Twitter. You just need to know their specific OAuth2 endpoint, or you could create your own OAuth2 server, and then your endpoint would be like this. Maybe I'll do that in future videos. Anyways, leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already subscribed, and I will see you guys in the next one.